So there's a lot of this stuff on the quiz. And if you get this stuff mixed up, you're going to lose a lot of points on the quiz. So I'm just making sure I kind of cover everything again. What is p-value?
The probability of getting a value that is as extreme as the one observed if the null hypothesis.
If the null hypothesis is true. So that's the idea of the example from Friday. The probability of him running a 5.25 mile or slower, if he really did run an average 5-minute mile, were the 7.9%. So it's the probability of getting a result that far or farther if the null hypothesis actually is true. So alpha is called the significance level. I haven't really called it that yet. You might just want to write somewhere that alpha is significance level. So we talked about how we can change what we decide is like our cutoff for yes, we overturn it, or no, we don't. That's the alpha that we're changing. So the way I wrote conclusion is we are comparing p-value to our alpha at the very end, and we are deciding whether or not our p-value is what compared to our alpha. So like this is the conclusion sentence. I'm comparing to see if my alpha or my p-value is less than, and so I'm doing it specifically as less than or not less than. Now, is that the same thing as greater than or equal to? Yes, but for the sake of making all things yes, 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 or no, 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 I just write it this way. So if our p-value is less than alpha, so our probability of being that far or farther is really small, then we do what to our null hypothesis? So our p-value is small, a low p-value means we what? What do we do to this? Reject the null hypothesis. If our p-value is not really, really small, so it's not so unlikely that it probably didn't happen by chance, then we what instead? Fail to reject. What do we never do? Accept. We either had enough evidence to convict or we didn't have enough evidence to convict. So this connection, you have to understand which one is which. So if we're basically like thinking about like we're taking somebody to court, we think that which thing's going to happen, the first thing or the second thing. If I'm taking somebody to court, do I think the first thing or the second thing is going to happen? The first thing, so otherwise why would I take them to court? If it is this path, it is called statistically significant. So if we do overturn it, we call that statistically significant. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I just want you right now to understand that rejecting the null hypothesis because p-value is lower than alpha is statistically significant. Now, I don't need you to write this out with the conclusion. I just want to go through this really quick. So here is my fill in the blank for conclusion. We something the null hypothesis, since the p-value something less than alpha, we something have convincing evidence that the mean is that direction. So what if we say we're doing something with null hypothesis? So our two options are we what or what the null hypothesis? Reject or fail to reject. So I'm going to go through this whole thing with reject. So if we do reject the null hypothesis, that means the p-value is less than alpha, which means we do have convincing evidence that the mean is that direction. So positive connotation, positive, positive. That's why I write less than like this. As opposed to this one would be we fail to reject the null hypothesis, since the p-value is not less than alpha, which means so all of those, failed, reject, is not, do not. So it's either all positives or all negatives. It's easier to remember it that way than try to think of it as greater than or equal to when switching through all that. So on your quiz on Friday, there are going to be questions where I literally just say, write the conclusion. So if you can't write the conclusion, you are going to miss a lot of points. Should that be an easy thing to do? Yes. Unless you just don't look at the sentence and try not to figure it out until you're sitting there in front of the quiz. So again, test grades up or down. If you know the conclude sentence, it makes it a lot easier. If you don't even know where to start, kind of hard to get the right answer. So any questions with just the terms p-value, alpha, and our conclude sentence? How do we get p-value? Where do we get p-value from? Maybe I haven't completely made that connection. Where do I get alpha from? Alpha is either going to be given, or if it's not given, what do we use? 0.05. Our p-value is what we get, just like when we do, like from before, when we figure out the lines there and we shade it, and it's the area, the shaded area, our p-value is the probability of that shaded area. So we actually find our p-value, and then we just put those two things together to get our conclusion. Yes. Yes, p-value is always area. Good question. Which means, what can p-value not be? Greater than 1 or less than 0.